Thank you, Meg, and the organising committee. This is my 4th GBR Social Science Symposium, and it's quite an honour to be asked to do the keynote, even though I did regret earlier this week saying yes when I got off a plane from Italy on Monday. But anyway, I'm going to give it my best shot. So I'd like to thank the organising committee and Brendan for the introduction to the conference. I'd also like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting today, the Kombumerri people. And I'd like to thank Clinton for his welcome to this beautiful country and also pay my respects to elders past and present. I acknowledge and thank the Kombumerri people for their continuing connection to and care of the coastlines and ecosystems of the land that we are meeting on since time immemorial. I would also like to acknowledge the First Nations people of the Great Barrier Reef, which is the topic of focus for this symposium, and extend my respect to all First Nations people present today. So the symposium headline paragraph states that for the community of the Great Barrier Reef, the social sciences have never been more critical. Following yet another year of devastating bleaching events, and I think this is the 5th major bleaching event for the reef, it is time to reimagine the future of the reef and think creatively and cleverly about how social science fits within this reimagined reef future. In fact, how it might possibly even drive this reimagined future. A reimagined future with a resilient reef at its core. Taking this future's thinking and a feeling that we are at a juncture when it comes to how social science is conducted and applied, I've taken this keynote as an opportunity to engage in some conversations with reef policymakers on how they use social science, what challenges they face, what helps in the application of social science to decision making, and what could be done better. This keynote is an opportunity to feed back some of these key findings from these conversations so far, and also to reflect on what these sometimes operational challenges mean as next steps for our community of practice, so all of us in this room and online. And just some points of clarification before I launch into some of the things that we found. Social science is a very broad topic, and I'm an economist, and I felt over the past probably 20 years in which I've worked in this space, I seem to drift in and out of the tent of social science, so in and out of the tent of inclusion. So in this presentation, I'm not actually going to use social science as in my language. I'm talking about human dimensions. Human dimensions specifically focus on the conducting and use of human dimensions research and monitoring. That is, research and monitoring focused upon the social, cultural, economic and institutional factors that shape people's relationships with the reef. And a few thank yous before I begin. So I'd just like to thank Tracy Schultz and Robin Gulliver from UQ, who have helped with sort of framing some of the questions in the conversations, and Clémence Belganouille, who is a student intern with CSIRO until December from France, who's been involved in some of the conversations as well. Some other caveats: this is a work in progress. What I present today are some key themes from some of the initial conversations that we've had, and we've tried to have these conversations across the range of governance, so from the federal government all the way through to regional bodies. But we're certainly not finished, and you never miss an opportunity to put a QR code at the end of a presentation. So if you think that you'd like to actually have a conversation with us about how you're using social science or human dimensions research and monitoring, either you can go to that QR code and do the short survey, or just pop your contact details in and we can line up a conversation with you. It's at the end. Thank you. I also want to highlight that at this stage, the topic of conversations have been quite broad. First Nations engagement, for example, has come up in conversations, but it's not an area that we have sought out conversations explicitly for yet. So I just wanted to start by running through a little bit where human dimensions research and monitoring has been applied in the reef over, say, the last 10 to 15 years. So it's been heavily used to assist in the implementation of actions. So you're probably all familiar with Reef Trust Program, Reef Trust Partnership Program, Water Quality Improvement Plans, and the OGBR Human Dimensions projects. All of these being heavily focused on managing the terrestrial space, so trying to understand and influence how land managers manage their land for water quality improvement through runoff from catchments. More recently, we've been moving much more into the salty space, and the RAP, Reef Restoration Adaptation Program, this is like a conference of acronyms, has been much more about looking at human dimensions research and monitoring in the marine or salty space. And so some examples there about social license and best practice engagement. Human dimensions is also starting to feature quite strongly in the assessment of actions. So the report cards, whether they be the regional reef report cards or the water quality improvement plan report cards, human dimensions, for the first time ever, got its own section in the scientific consensus statement, and I think actually generated the most conversation in that process. Human dimensions research and monitoring is all through the Outlook report, which was released 2 weeks ago, and is throughout all of the future tasks and forward thinking in the GBR Roundtable report. So it's getting a lot more traction, a lot more interest, and a lot more influence. Most recently, through the Reef Trust Partnership, Integrated Monitoring and Reporting, RIMREP project, on human dimensions, in terms of how we assess things going forward. So frameworks to measure stewardship, called PROTECT, frameworks to measure governance, frameworks to measure benefits, and frameworks to measure values, and in fact CellTemp has got quite a track record now in measuring these values. All of this with a very small part of the pie when it comes to the funding, and this is not all funding that goes to human dimensions, but this was the funding bucket from the last lot of investment in RIMREP. And you can see the big blobs are the natural sciences and the smaller blobs are the human dimensions sciences. CellTemp's not included in that figure. So you can see we're doing pretty good stuff with not a lot of the money. Okay, there's a weird blob on the top of that screen, but never mind. Okay, so what did we ask our decision makers in this conversation? We wanted to know, why do you think understanding human dimensions is important in reef decision making? How do you use human dimensions research and monitoring in decision making? What makes it challenging and what makes it easy? And in terms of what makes it easy, therefore, what should we be doing more of? And some answers. And before I go through some of the answers that we received, it was really nice to hear that the common theme across all the answers was the understanding about the fact that the reef is a socio-ecological system, not just an ecological system. People are really, really important to understanding the reef and therefore managing the reef going forward. So some examples of some of the responses that we got. Most problems are human problems. If there were no people, there would be nothing to manage. People are pivotal to getting the results. And moving on to sort of linking the people with the ecology, we need to know the functionality of the ecosystems and the functionality of the communities in relation to these ecosystems. We can't solve the biophysical part without the social component. And this last one shows that the inclusion of human dimensions research and monitoring is quite new in a lot of spaces. So prior to the last two reef report cards, all information was biophysical. It was not connected to people at all. Okay. And then we asked in our conversations for some examples of where human dimensions research and monitoring had been used in decision making. And what's really interesting in the responses to these questions is the use of human dimensions research and monitoring is much more heavily used the closer an agency is to making interventions, to touching the stuff. So the Australian government, as DECU, said that it was a bit hard to find examples, but they were much more aware of the potential for use of human dimensions research and monitoring science moving forward, and they particularly noted PROTECT as being a way of evaluating stewardship programs as being something that they could really tangibly use into the future. But they'd like us to come back and talk to them in 2 to 5 years' time, so we will. The Reef Authority, because it's much closer to like the interventions, had lots of examples of the use of people in this space. So zoning plans, plans of management, and you'll see in the Outlook report, human dimensions is linked into all of the ecological chapters, and there is a note about there's an increase in the interest in human dimensions since 2019. In the Queensland government, because they're designing interventions on the ground, there's a lot of use of human dimensions research and monitoring to actually work out what those interventions should be. And then it's heavily reported when it comes to understanding what people did. So what are the drivers of adoption? Or what are the opposite of drivers to adoption? And then the regional reef report cards, the human dimensions work is used to understand how people see the natural system, how they are valued, perceived, healths and threats. They would like to use this much more to direct efforts of stewardship, but there was actually a note that the connection between the ecological system and the human system is still not hard, so it's actually still quite hard for them to communicate the human dimensions work and turn that into tangible things. Which leads me on to the challenges. So spatial scale. At present, the data provides a thin veneer across the entire reef. We don't need more data everywhere. That's not to say we don't need more data, but we just don't need it everywhere. We need to focus on specific areas which we know need management. And then time. It's very difficult to get information in the manner that you need it to make timely decisions. Often information is retroactive, backward-looking, and by the time it is used, is already outdated. And then the integration part. So natural science and human dimension science is not well integrated. When the two are not presented together, you miss the so what. And that definitely came up with the regional reef report cards, having that sort of disconnect between what they wanted to do on the ground and what the human dimensions information told them and what the biophysical information that they had. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. In our conversations, many solutions were also put forward to overcome the challenges. And this is where I think we start to move into what this conference is all about, which is about futures thinking. So overall, we need a futures focus. We need to think about what is going to happen in 2, 5, 10 years' time. So we need to know what information we need in these places. Who do we need to engage with? What information do we need now to make policy now for a resilient future? What information will we need to know if things are improving or not? And this was seen as being critical in the context of a changing climate. I think some other things to note when you're thinking about futures thinking, it facilitates interdisciplinarity initially. So breaking down the silos. There was mention about science still being done in silos. Interdisciplinarity starts to break down these science. And with a view to transdisciplinarity down the road. So pure or true futures thinking would need a transdisciplinarity approach. And I sort of stopped here and paused on Kerry's keynote from last year with the cow. What do you see when you look at the cow? Everyone remembers the cow, okay? It's about all of the perspectives in the room to come up with the futures thinking. So what helps? Embedded research. So when we started these conversations, we were starting to think about, well, how do we translate the science better so that it can be used? And actually, if you have embedded research, you don't really need so much translation because the science is being done with those that are going to use it from the very beginning. And the embeddedness can even happen prior to the questions being formed. And I note that in the last, the Reef Trust Partnership, RIMREP projects, the embeddedness happened even with identifying the gaps in knowledge, even before the questions were designed. And I think I've got quotes there that I haven't even looked at. So it needs to become the practice norm. What is strive for, be resourced, and happen from the beginning. The old model soil researchers come to reef managers with a link to an article, or at least after the project was developed or mostly done, usually when they needed a specific thing. And I think we're all guilty of that as researchers. The Reef Trust Partnership model has shifted this with decision makers and policy makers embedded into research teams and vice versa. Communication. So even if you have embedded research, communication is still important. Communicate human dimensions knowledge into easily digestible bits, which can be easily put into the hands of decision makers. So decision makers are very, very busy. They don't have time to read journal papers and long reports. Short bits with lots of pictures, with the stories that go with the data, because it was noted that human dimensions knowledge is very nuanced and context dependent. So communicated with the story really helped. Be less terrifying in the language that we use, but without losing the nuance. And I love this one, spread the love. Bring a GBR natural scientist to a GBR social science event. Are there any natural scientists in the room? Yes, everybody give Libby some love. And there was a few other hands, okay? So I always think that when you have a social science session, it's with social scientists. Natural science session tends to be with natural scientists. So it would be great to bring more natural scientists along to these events and for us to go to more of the natural science events so we can learn each other's language as well as know how we can connect. Collaborate. And this comment came from a natural scientist. The social scientist brings such a united front. It is not one against the other. It is a very collaborative space. So I think pats on the back to everybody for the collaboration. The RTP IMR RIMREP, it's going to be an acronym test at the end, has been a big part of that and has created this united front. Now, if I could flip these cards over, the opposite side to this comment was, this could all end overnight. This is very dependent on funding, and it would be such a shame to lose the funding for this collaboration and researchers going back to sort of protecting their own patches and working in a competitive space. Collaboration, I don't know that this one fits exactly under collaboration, but this was about genuine Indigenous engagement, starting with building relationships, building trust, and that this needs to be properly resourced, not just budget, but time. And then data. There is enough data, but in some cases there's not enough internal expertise to use the data well. And I think there'd be a lot of debate about whether or not there is enough data, and maybe if you start thinking about space-based management, it's maybe not about collecting more data, but collecting the right data in the right places, in the right timescales. So once again, thinking in place, but into the future. Data hygiene is important. There was a comment about the past that there was little maintenance of data, so there was little known about where data came from, who owned it, how good it was, if you could still access it. That is definitely improving, and the efforts to the data management system has really helped in terms of creating collaborative processes to create usable, visual and maintainable data. So, what does this mean? So I've talked to you today about a lot of operational things, but what does this mean in terms of the big picture? And I would sort of conclude with some thoughts drawing on the Reef Roundtable report. Human dimensions is gaining traction, we can see that. It's no longer considered only as understanding the pressures on the reef. The fact that human dimensions is interwoven through the Reef Roundtable report in their key actions, tied to multiple chapters in the Outlook report, and a major area of interest of the scientific consensus statement really proves this. So human dimensions are not just considered to be the pressure in the system. It's increasingly recognised that humans receive social, cultural and economic value from the reef. Humans are also the source of stewardship and care for the reef and its catchments, and the impact of this is being influenced by how we organise ourselves. Whilst I have focused on how we can conduct and use human dimensions research and monitoring well and better, as we launch into the Futures Focus Symposium, I urge you to think about how you can take these operational lessons and apply them in futures thinking. Some food for thought when you're in the sessions. How we can work together to apply human dimensions research and monitoring to input in how communities view climate risk to the reef. How communities manage and adapt to disrupted lives and livelihoods, because this is the reality going forward. And how to better understand trade-offs of actions in a resource-constrained environment. We can't save everything, so how can we use our science to help work out what needs to be done? So today, think forward, think collaboratively, think about how to embed research and monitoring, or how to embed research and monitoring into your decision making. Think about how your part fits into the future whole. Think about being collaborative, means the whole is greater than the parts. Think about how you can make your part greater than its fragment. And I had to bring in some holiday photos. You can see there at the top is a painting that got blown up by the mafia, and there are all the fragments, okay? So think about how you can make your part greater than its fragment to be part of the beautiful picture below. Thank you.